So as I mentioned, Jira Service Management, in my opinion, the most underutilized feature in Jira Service Management. And like I mentioned, we worked with hundreds of teams to implement JSM in the past, Smilus being one of the more recent ones, where we've implemented a lot of organizational and relationships with Jira directly. So we've identified key use cases and the most common ways that assets have been used in Jira. We've put together like a framework essentially on how to start using assets, how to bring your data in, and then how to actually use it with Jira Service Management and automations later on. So as we get into this, let's stay connected. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, scan the QR code on the screen. I'll also throw up a quick link. That way you can just click the link and go straight to our newsletter sign up. So let me promote that on the stage. If you want to click that link, just hit that. And then we send out one Jira tip a week. So if you're interested in getting some kind of Jira related or Atlassian related value, we drop something valuable once a week. And we help you use Jira better one tip at a time. So if you're interested in that, just hit the QR code or hit the link on the bottom left, and you could sign up for our newsletter. All right. So quick agenda overview. As I mentioned, we'll go over key definitions and how to use Jira. Then we'll go over general UI navigations and using your assets, and then actually bringing your assets in. So once we have those assets in there, we'll go over some real world applications and then integrating that directly with Jira, which is probably the most critical part. Once you actually have your assets, how do you actually use it with Jira practically? And how is it valuable and how does it save you time? And at the very end, we'll do a Q&A. So again, feel free to drop your questions down below at any point. All right, let's check in our poll and see what we have. Okay, so we have 50% of you who have never used assets, 44% of you who have, and then 2% or 6% of you who don't know what assets are. So majority of you have not used assets, which is awesome. We'll be covering that A to Z on this webinar. So you'll be fully in knee deep within assets, and you'll be able to jump in and start implementing this for your own organization after this webinar. All right, so let's jump into the screen share. So to get to assets, whenever you're in Jira, all you have to do is find your assets tab. So some of you may be on the old UI, some of you may be on the new UI. Depending on which UI you currently have, it's either going to be on the left or on the very top. And the tab should just say assets, nothing else. Might be hidden under a more menu or more panel, but once you click on it, that should bring you to a page that looks something like this. So keep in mind, this has some demo data in it, so it won't look exactly like this for you. You might have a little bit more of a bare bones version of this with some services and maybe one other schema, but this is what we're going to be looking at, and this is our home page and our home base for all of our assets in Jira. So what are these, and how do we create them? How do we use them? So these are the object schemas, and I'll dive into one as a sample. I'll use facilities because that's a fairly common one and easy to understand. So I'll go into my facility schema, and in here we have a schema tree, and what these are object types. So the terminology for everything on the left side here is an object type. The terminology for everything on the right side is an object. So we have object types that store different objects. If you have a slightly different view, you might be looking at a detail view, and that will be something like this. If you want to switch to the list view, which I personally prefer, and this is kind of similar to the detail and list view within Jira, I personally like seeing all the columns in one place. So I like this view, but you could flip between the two and find the most useful view for yourself. So with our object types on the left, we have the objects on the right. Let's dive into one of these and take a look. So let's say we're looking at, and I'll collapse all of these to make it really simple. Let's say we're looking at our offices. So if I click on our offices object, we now have a list of objects that are our offices within our organization. So we'll have things like a virtual office, a Sydney office, Boston office. So this is a great way to organize some of your data and information. In there, we have, in this object type, we have a child object type for floors. So now we have these same exact offices with different floor levels. And then we have one more level down, which are rooms. So these are all kind of flowing up into the offices, from the rooms to the floors to the office locations. So that's how we look at object types and objects and how we store that information. So you could really think of this almost as like an open-ended database. So with our assets, we could really store any kind of information in here. You could think of this as an Excel spreadsheet as well, with just a lot better tracking, relationships, and integration with Jira. And we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of that a little bit later, but generally speaking, assets are great for storing information, being able to create relationships between that information, and being able to present that within Jira. So if I jump into an office, we are going to take a look at, let's say, Sydney HQ. When I open this up, we have our office and some attributes. Attributes are just a fancy name for fields. So we have all of our fields listed here that we've created and added. And then we have on the right side, I'll go over linked objects in a sec, but linked issues is your Jira issues that you're linking to these assets. Then we have attachments. And then we have what are called linked objects. So this is where relationships come in. And this is what the real power of assets really is. So as you can see here with Sydney HQ, we have location region linked objects, facilities manager. We have other office locations, and then other relationships associated with this particular office. So this relationship might make a little more sense with the floor. So if I jump in here, look in Austin, now we have our Austin floor with an object relationship to the Austin office. So we could see that with a two-way relationship, and that's created via an attribute on the asset itself. So we have an office, we have the Austin office, and this attribute is defined as a relationship. And all the relationships are just other assets within our organization. And then once we add that, so if I remove this, we could see that that relationship is gone. And if I add Austin back, we could see that the relationship will be rebuilt. So there's your relationships, and that's how they work on a very basic level. This does get a lot more complex, and we'll go over some of those more complex relationships later. But at the core, if you ever want to find a schema, you just go to your schemas or your assets, you'll pull up your schemas, and you'll be able to dive in. You'll be able to see all of your object types and your objects. So how do we actually create these? So all we have to do to create a new schema is click this button to create a new schema. There's a couple of basic templates in here. This isn't very, there's not a lot of great examples here yet. If you're not familiar with assets, what I suggest doing is start with one of these templates just to explore. Even if it's not something that you're intending to do, just open up a people assets or an IT schema, and dive in and just take a look at how relationships are built, take a look at how employees are managed, how hierarchies are created, just to get familiar with it. And then you could either tweak those templates or you could completely delete them. And then you could start over from scratch and build your own schemas. So for the demo purpose, for the purposes of this demo today, I'll create a quick blank schema. So you'll click on that. You'll give it a quick name, a key, and a description. I already built a test schema, so I'll jump into that. But once it's created, it'll add to your list of schemas and look something like this. So we have our test schema here, and now we could start adding our objects and our object types and our objects. So you'll have an empty schema. So if you want to add an object type, you click the plus icon, and then you give your object type a name. So let's call this, and then we'll give this a quick icon. So maybe I could pull in globe because that might make the most sense here. I could add a parent object type. In this case, I'll just leave it as a standard, and then I could add a description. I won't add that either. I'll just click create. So we now have our object type created with no objects in it yet. And no attributes associated with it. So to start creating an object, there's a little button here to create one. You could also click this button here at the top. We'll create an object, and now we could create an object name. So locations, let's give this location US. And let's maybe create one more location, and we'll call this one maybe Canada, since that's the closest country around here. And now we have a couple of locations that we're storing as objects. So now we have our object types. Now we have our objects. Let's dive into one of these objects. And all the information here is blank, and we have no attributes. So to add our attributes to these objects, we could go back to our locations. There's a little tab here with an attributes tab that you could go to create new attributes for this object type. So each of these are going to be unique. So if I shuffle through these, you'll see that there's some object types with more attributes, some with less. Some with relationships and more objects, but out of the box, you'll be met with your key, your name, created and updated. Those are the only attributes that you're getting out of box, and you'll need to start creating them from here on out. So let's say locations. We want to add a location of maybe state if we're in the US. So we're going to add state, and I'll leave this as just a plain text field. And let's also go ahead and add maybe like a zip code if we want to add some more details or location details. And in this case, I could use a default field. Maybe I could use a number field or something else. So we'll just leave it as text field because number fields tend to format a little bit differently. And then maybe we could add let's say we want to add a date field, maybe date, date created or date established. And that way we could store a specific time when this particular office was established. So we're going to select date field from the options. And as you can see here, there's quite a bit of options that we can select from. This is somewhat similar to creating custom fields within Jira. You could create integers, booleans, date times. So not just dates, but date times, adding a URL, emails, IP addresses. So quite a bit of options here. And this should cover all the bases that you have. Most commonly, you'll probably end up using text, date fields, and then there's also a text area, which is kind of like a larger description field. So that may come in handy as well. And oh, can't use a dot there, so I'll remove that. And then I'll add maybe a description. That way we have a text area field, and we could add a little bit more detail about this particular location. There's a few more types of fields that we can create. So those are all default fields. But there's also different objects that we could create and relate to. We could add users and groups here. These users and groups are pulling directly from your Atlassian users and groups. So if you want to pull in individuals or groups of people and assign them to a particular location, you could do that here. Then you could add projects, which are just Jira projects. Statuses. Statuses are really great. I'll actually add a status field here to maybe say an office is currently in commission or maybe decommissioned or currently open or closed. So statuses are really great. And then Bitbucket repository is the last option. With statuses, I'll leave these all blank, which means we could use all of them. But if you wanted to narrow it down, you could select some of these and say, like, these are the only two options that we can select from these statuses. I'll leave them blank to give us more options. So we built all of our attributes that we need for this object. Now, if we head back to our objects, I could jump into our US object, and all of our fields are located here. So I could start filling these out. So state, I'm in Missouri, so I'll just say Missouri, zip code. I could drop in a zip code and estimate a date or date established. Let's say it was just the beginning of this month, so we'll drop that in there. We could add a description and add all of our info about this location. And then we could add a status, maybe say it's open if that's an option, or maybe active. Let's do active because I know that's an option. All right, there we go. And we have our object created and all of our details filled out. So it's as simple as that to get started and create your first schema, your object type, and your objects. So very simple, very basic implementation. You can now start storing things like employees. You could start storing assets, laptops, hardware. You could start storing different softwares and being able to track all that here. So possibilities are endless, as you can probably imagine. And this is how you get started and actually implement your very first object. So let's talk a little bit about the relationships and slightly more advanced different field types that we have available to us. So I'll name this one, let's say office, and maybe I want to relate to an office right here. So I'll go ahead and go to the object. So what we're doing here is we're pulling in another object from either another schema or another object type within the current schema. So I want to pull offices from our test schema. So I'll make sure our test schema is here. And this is the one we need, offices. We also have all of our other schemas, as you can see here, in all of our object types from those schemas. And you could search for them. So if I type in offices, I should be able to pull that up here. But I want that one in particular, so I'll make sure it's under the test schema and it has the correct name. So I'll pull that in and I'll give it a reference type. Reference types can be made, or you can customize these. I'll use the out-of-box one since these are fairly simple. And I'll just use a link. But you can call this like office, or you could create a dependency called employee or groups or users or something else. So I'll show you how to create those in a little bit, but for right now, I'll just leave it as a link. So we've now created our first object relationship. If we go back to our objects and I open up the US object, we can now go to our office and hit the dropdown. And now we were met with a few different options: Chicago, Miami, New York, Seattle. So where is this list getting generated from? Well, if I go to my offices, we now see Chicago, Miami, New York, Seattle. If I create a new one in here, I'll create one for maybe Washington, DC, and I'll add this. So now we have 5. Go back to my locations, back to US, hit the drop down, and now we have Washington, DC as an option. So you can see how these relationships are very powerful. You can automatically pull in different information, create those relationships between different assets, not only within this schema, but within all schemas. And you can create all these kinds of relationships between all of these different assets. And then what's really cool is you could actually visualize and see these relationships using the object graph. So if I pull that open, we have a very simple relationship graph with a US and a Washington, DC location. If I pull up the other facilities schema, I'll show you what that looks like when it's a little bit more in depth. So I'll pull up an office and I'll show you what the object schema looks like here. And you can see that these do get quite complicated. You can adjust how many levels or reference depths we have. So I'll adjust this to 2 and maybe adjust this to 1. And now we only see one relationship down. So we see the Amsterdam office, and then we see all the objects related to the Amsterdam office. And we could visualize exactly how these interact with each other and how they are related to each other. So this is very useful from a services perspective. Obviously, there's a lot of use cases for this, but I'll go over the services schema just because it makes a lot of sense in this kind of a context. So when you're managing services, if you're an IT team, for an example, you have your services that are your front-facing client services. So CMS might be your front-facing client services, which is supported by some business services, which is supported by some software services, which is eventually supported by some infrastructure, either cloud or on-prem or wherever. So the idea behind these relationships is that I could look at the object graph, and looks like there's nothing related here. Let me pull up a different one. And what we could do is, why do none of these have a relationship? Let me see if I could find one with, there we go. So we could pull up a relationship that's going to look something like this. Let me maybe increase the reference depth to see if we could pull in more info. And now we have something that looks like this. So you can imagine that this is going to be our front-facing service. Then we have maybe some back-end services. Then we have some APIs running on the back end. Then we have some more dependencies that support this particular service. And then from there, we could branch out even further. Maybe I could pull those in, but we could have things like your servers. So it looks like we don't have any attached here, but you could have all of your servers and your infrastructure supporting each one of these items. So what's really cool about this is you could look at a server, let's say mobile payments goes down, and mobile payments supports the mobile API, which supports mobile primary, which supports front door, which is your front-facing service. So you know that as soon as mobile payments go down, your front door goes down. So this is great to see with any kind of outages that may happen, with any kind of change management that you want to do. You can be able to set up some downtime for this particular server, and you'll know exactly which services that affects. Same thing, correlated with all of your IT assets and the people that are in your organization. There's a lot you could do with these object graphs and relationships, and I'll dive into those right now as well as we go over some of the use cases. So that's going to give you a quick start on how to jump in, start creating your objects, start diving in, creating your object types, creating your attributes, and creating relationships. So what are some common use cases that are used within assets? So working with hundreds of teams that use assets, these are probably the most common that you'll see. There's a few more that I'll talk about that aren't listed here, but for the most part, these are going to be the most common. So your application portfolios, that's going to be your applications hosted by your company. If you're a company that does any kind of SaaS software or hosts any kind of applications, you could store that information here. Customer support, this is really great for being able to identify and store all of your customers, your organizations, their locations. So if you're using JSM for front-facing customer support, I've seen a lot of companies use this to be able to track all the organizations and customers. Engineering support, this is primarily for groups and teams. So you could store all of your users, your groups, your teams, be able to assign different teams to different Jira tasks and Jira bugs, feature requests, outages, things of that nature. Facilities, we already went over this one, but this is very straightforward and simple to understand. You store all of your locations, your buildings, your offices, your floors, all of your conference rooms if you'd like, transportation, everything else that you'd like to store here, you could store within facilities. IT employee assets, this is probably the most common one that I've seen. A lot of IT teams will use this for asset management of employee hardware. So you'll have things like your laptops, there we go. You'll have things like phones that employees use, monitors. The really cool thing here is that you could actually relate these to individual users. So the owner here is set for this particular MacBook Pro. All the information of this MacBook Pro is listed here. And then we could also see tickets coming in from this user that uses this particular device. So really cool here because we actually have these relationships to issues in Jira. So let's say we have 5 tickets that come in this month about this MacBook Pro having issues. If I'm an IT agent or IT help desk individual, I might look at that and say, okay, maybe it's time to replace this laptop because it's been having so many issues. So employee assets and hardware and software, that's a very common one. Practice standards and people, well, let me go over people first because that's also a big one. So you could store internal and external users here. So we already went over kind of the customer organization facing, but then we also have internal. So you could store all of your departments, all of your teams, all of your roles. That way you know exactly who's on your team. You could create some org charts through this. You can know exactly who's a part of your team, where they are. You could share this with your organization. That way everybody knows who each other is. And you can sync this with Azure AD or Google Workspace and bring all this data in automatically as well. So a lot of powerful stuff here. And the idea here is that you store your users, which you can then use to relate to your assets. You could also relate those to your facilities. So you can now imagine how those relationships build on each other across different schemas. Practice standards, also very common for storing all of your different processes, your compliance-related things, your risk assessments. You could store all of these and then again assign these to different users, groups, and other things within your schemas. Services, which we already covered. And then there's a couple more that aren't listed here. As I mentioned, like this is fairly open, and you could think of this as like an open database or an Excel spreadsheet. So I've even seen organizations use assets for tracking physical inventory and being able to ship that from like job to site, from job to job. So there's a lot of opportunity to use this for anything that you're tracking within any piece of software. And being able to use that to leverage it directly within Jira. All right, so those are the common use cases. Obviously, there's a lot more. I'm sure you could think of some that may apply for your company that I didn't mention here. But again, think of this as an open database or Excel spreadsheet. So now that we know how to bring or create your first schema, your objects and object types, and now that we know the use cases behind these, how do we actually bring our data into here? So the first way, which we already went over, is just creating those assets manually. So in the test schema, we went over locations. We created a couple of those. This is going to be the best way to get started if you don't currently have a lot of asset management outside of Jira or really anywhere else. So a lot of smaller companies might find this useful just to start getting started with some kind of tracking, implement some kind of form of tracking outside of maybe an Excel spreadsheet, and getting that stored in here and then creating those objects and relationships. So manually creating is great for if you don't currently have anything. The other two options we have are going to be to bring your data into assets that are already stored somewhere else. So one of those ways is going to be with API. And API, I won't be diving in too much into this demo, but API is going to allow you to create objects, to modify objects, and one really great option for this is plugins. There's a lot of plugins on the Jira and Atlassian App Store that create your assets and bring your data in. A couple that I could think of right off the bat that I've used that are really great in particular are a couple of plugins that sync with Azure AD and Intune. So those will bring your data into Jira Assets and they'll also keep them in sync at the same time. So if you're looking to bring your data in from a very specific source and potentially get it synced, I would look at plugins first and then look at API. And the third way and the most common way is going to be with a CSV import. So let's say that you're already tracking in Excel, or maybe you have an external assets tracking tool and you're planning to move to Jira, or you want to use it in conjunction with Jira, and you want to bring your data in with CSV, which is going to be 99% of the time that's going to be the way that you're going to be creating your assets. So with all of our CSV imports, what you want to do is find the schema that you'll import into. So let's go ahead and do our test schema, and then we'll go to our object or schema settings. It's going to be the three dots on the top right, depending on the UI that you're looking at. When you're in this view, you'll have an import tab on the very right. So this import tab will allow you to create all of your imports, map all of your information, and actually run the imports. So to get started with this, all we have to do is create our first import. And then there's a few different options in here. There's some discovery imports, JSON, which CSV tends to be a little bit better. And then we have an external import from a few other different applications. But for the most part, we'll just be using CSV. So we'll select that. We'll give this a name. So I'll say offices to import. And we could give this a description if we'd like. I'll leave it blank. And then what we're going to need to do is browse and open up a file that we have that's going to contain all of our assets. So let me pull in a sample file here. And what we're going to do is add that file in here. And then we have one item to either check or uncheck. So with this automatically creating object types attribute, the idea behind this is if you have all of your columns, or if you have a blank schema, I would leave this on because it actually creates those object types for you. So if you toggle this off, you're going to start going through and mapping everything manually, which I'll be doing. But if you wanted to automatically create all of your object types, all of your objects, all of your fields based on the columns that you have, you can leave this checked on and it does create it for you. The only problem with what it creates is it's all text fields. So if you're importing anything that you want as a dropdown or a status, those are all going to come over as text fields and you can modify them later. But if you already have a pre-built object schema with all the different field types that you want to import, you're going to want to leave this off and then map those manually. So I'll go over that since it's going to be a little bit of a harder process if you leave this checked. It's kind of all automated and automatically gets brought over. So once we have everything set up, we create our import and it gets listed here. So now we have Offices 2 and we have that first one here. So we can have multiple imports, which is really great because we could actually just update the information and run a new import again. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. But once we have our new import created, we could go ahead and edit the mapping. So to edit our mapping, we hit the drop down and we create a new mapping. And here we're going to want to select the object type that we're importing into. So I'll say, maybe I'll import into Offices 2. And then we could filter down by AQL. We'll leave all of these as the default options that Jira sets. There's a lot of things and nuance that these options do, but for the most part, default should get you the import that you're looking for. So we'll create this import, and now we have our import for Offices 2, which is our object schema in this, our object type in this schema. So now we could go to edit our attributes, and this is where we start to do the actual mapping. So we start to map the values from our CSV to the values that we have set up inside of our Offices 2 schema. So I could click on the data source field, which is going to be pulling from our CSV, and these are all of the columns that we have. So you could think of these as all the attributes, and then you're actually mapping those to attributes within the schema. So I'll start with name, since that one's required. So name is going to map to name. Maybe I have a created date that I want to bring over. So date incorporated, I could add that. What else do we have? So we have an address. Let's see if I have an address here. Perfect. So you're going to want to look at your CSV and make sure that all of your destination attributes are already existing and created. And then you're just going to go through and you map all of those here as you would with a normal CSV import. So once you're done mapping, there's one thing you need to make sure that you have checked correctly. This doesn't matter for your first import, but it does matter for the imports after the very first one. The thing that you want to check is the identifier. So the identifier is going to be what's used or what Jira is using to see if it's a duplicate or if it's a new imported item. So let's say that I have this CSV import and I run it once and I'm going through and I want to run it again with a couple of updated fields. So what we're going to do is add an identifier, which is going to tell Jira and say, hey, if this value already exists, don't create a new one, update the existing one. So if there's a location for Washington, D.C., and the destination attribute already has a Washington, D.C., it's going to go through and check all of the different columns and different all the rest of our mappings here and say, okay, the address is a little bit different for Washington, D.C. Let's go ahead and update that. If we don't have this identifier checked, what it's going to do is just going to create a new Washington, D.C. every single time we run the import. So again, this doesn't matter for the very first time, but if you are bringing in data and you're updating data, make sure your identifier is unique and is set as the correct item. So name is probably a good one for most of these, but if you do have duplicate names, I would look at using something a little bit more unique. So once we have our identifier set, once we have our destination attributes mapped, that's pretty much it. We could go ahead and enable this. So we could click on the three dots, we'll enable this, and now we get a ready to run. So once we are ready to run, all we have to do is import the data. So I'll start running the import. This file is fairly small, so it should be really quick. And it should start to map and create everything for us. And once this runs, perfect. Now we have Offices 2 that are imported. Let's go back to our schema. Test schema, Offices 2. And now all of our items are created. So the fields that we mapped came over. The fields that we didn't map did not come over. So as you can see here, some info did get brought over. We had a lot more info that we could have mapped if we create more attributes. So if I create another attribute here, I'll name it test attribute and add this. Now if we go back to our schema and into our schema settings, into the import tab, and let's say we want to run this one more time. So I'll go through my attribute mapping and I now have the test attribute and I could map a new value to my test attribute. We'll go ahead and add this. We'll make sure the identifier is set as name. In this case, name is unique for every value. So we're updating, and now we're adding another attribute for every single one of those items. So I'll go ahead and fix that. I might re-upload a new CSV, which you can do by clicking this button, clicking Edit Import Structure. You remove the old CSV, you add your updated CSV, and then all you have to do is re-import your data. So now once the data re-imports, it's not going to be creating more attributes, it's just updating the existing ones. So let's go back to Offices 2. We'll jump back in here, and let's see if we have any test attributes that are filled out. It might still be running, but it should be filling out those attributes once we filled out all of our information. So that's how we run our CSV imports. Again, if you're doing multiple, make sure to have that identifier set correctly and make sure it is unique. So those are the three primary ways: manual creation, API, either manual API or with plugins. And then the third option is the CSV import. There's a few other options that we can use to implement and automatically bring in data. One of those is the collector, and that's an on-prem collector for on-prem infrastructure. So if you have some kind of infrastructure and data center, you could implement that collector on-prem. It's going to collect all of your data daily, updated in Jira. There's also Data Manager, which is a very new product from Jira and Atlassian. It essentially aggregates from multiple different data sources like cloud, on-prem, syncing from like Azure and other tools. It cleanses that data and then it imports. That is a little bit outside the scope of this webinar, but if you are interested in those, feel free to check those out. There should be some documentation on Data Manager and the the agent collector for on-prem infrastructure. So feel free to check those out. All right, so now that we have our data inside of our asset schema, how do we use this data with Jira Service Management? So the answer is it's fairly simple. We create a custom field, and then we relate the schema and object types to our tickets. So it's a simple idea, but the execution is a little bit more complex. So I'll walk you through that really quick and show you exactly how it's done. So I'll pull up a test Jira Service Management project. I'll go to maybe IT support as an example, and let's pull up one of these. And we have a ticket here with a laptop, but let's say we maybe want to pull in a peripheral. So how do we actually do that with a field that's going to be associated here and relate directly back to our assets just like this? So the way we do that is by creating a custom field for our objects. So I'll leave my tabs open here so you can see exactly what we're referencing and what we're doing, but we'll go to our settings, we'll go to our issues. This may say work items for you now since the terminology is changing. We'll go to our custom fields and we'll create a new custom field. And we'll go to all or advanced. That way we have this option for assets objects. When we click this option and click next, we'll be asked to give it a name. And I'll call this maybe keyboards, or actually let's do monitors since that might be a little bit more common. So we already have our laptops, but I now want to bring in monitors. So I'll create that custom field, and you might think we're done, but we're not done because we have to do a lot more work to actually present the data and show it correctly. So I can pull this field into our ticket, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'll search for my monitors field that I just created, and I'll pull that in right next to my laptop. And I'll save the changes, and we'll go back and see what happened. So we have our monitors on the right side. I'll give it a quick refresh. And as you can see here, there's a little error, and it says that this needs to be configured. So we can click the configure here, or we could just go back to our custom fields. And what I usually do is just search for the custom field one more time. And then we pull up our monitors, and you can see that it's an asset object. We're going to click the three dots on the right side, and we're going to edit the context and default values. So this is really where the magic happens and where you define what you're pulling in. So we'll edit the asset objects, and we'll define the schema first. So this is the schema that it's going to be searching for. So as you can imagine, when we're building this custom field, we don't want to pull in every single value across every single schema and object type. We want to pull in just the IT employee assets, and we want to pull in just the monitors. So we have only one option here, but that's the only option that we want to show up. We don't want everything else showing up, including keyboards and everything else. So what we'll do is select our schema first, IT employee assets. And then what we'll do is we'll use AQL to filter down even further. If you're not familiar with AQL, it's fairly similar to JQL. I like to use ChatGPT oftentimes to help me write this a little bit quicker. But the general idea is that you're defining object types and objects to be able to pull in specific values. So very simple here. All we need to do is look at our object types and say we want to pull in monitors. We are going to define our object type. So we'll say object type equals, and again, very similar to JQL, we'll open a parentheses and we'll type in our object type name, monitors, and we'll close parentheses. If we get the little check marks, that means we wrote it correctly and it should be working. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to pull in any objects. It just means that your AQL is written correctly. So now what we're doing is searching for IT employee assets in just the monitors object type. So IT employee assets in just the monitors object type. So this should be the only option that pops up for us. So I'll copy and paste this over to our filtered issue scope. I usually just copy and paste these. There's really not much other reason to filter these out differently. And then for user interaction, this is where we could set the fields that we want to show on the front of the ticket when we're looking at it. So I'll typically drop in name here, maybe the key. And then if we're looking at the object type, maybe we want to pull in, maybe I want to show the model. So let's show the model and add that in as well. And I'll just replicate that for searching for the attribute as well as showing it. So I'll add these same exact items here. So name, key, model, that's all I want to show here. And if I want to store multiple values, I'll check this box. We only have one value, but some users may have multiple monitors, so I'll check that box for now. So now we save this configuration, and let's head back to our Jira ticket, and let's refresh and see if we have a functioning field. Okay, so the error's gone. Let's go ahead and click Add Object and click the drop-down. And there we go. We have our object showing up. So we could select our monitor, we could associate now and click the check mark with this ticket. So now we know that Alana Grant has a laptop and we know exactly which laptop she's using. Then we know she has a monitor. We know exactly which monitor she's using. And it makes it super easy for our IT team to take a look at that, see if there's any problems, see exactly which model, whether it's a Mac or Windows, see how old it is, be able to resolve a request like this a lot quicker. So that's how you associate your objects with your Jira tickets. And then if we go back into the object, and this may take a second to show up, but let's see if it's there yet. Let's refresh. And linked issues should be showing up in a second here. It does take a little bit to actually link the issue here, but when we're looking at our objects, we could see all of the linked issues. Let me pull up the laptop since that one was already linked from before. And now we have a linked issue just like this showing up inside of our assets. So like I mentioned before, if I'm an IT employee and I see a lot of requests submitted and linked to this particular laptop, I may know it's time to replace that laptop. Same goes for monitors. Once it's linked, again, it takes a minute or two. But once that link does happen and show up here, we are able to identify every request opened with this particular asset. So you could do this in IT. You could do this with shipping different objects through portal submissions. Like if you have a portal submission for shipping an object from point A to point B, you could select all those items, including all of your locations inside of your assets. Then you could relate what you're shipping. Same thing with all of your infrastructure. You could open change management requests and know exactly which services are going down, relate those to the ticket. So a lot of different use cases here that you can utilize within Jira directly. And this is where the real power of Jira and Assets comes in. We can actually create tickets. We could automate the full process of linking assets that are related to this individual or to this ticket and automatically have them show up for our agents that are working within Jira Service Management. So hopefully that gives you a good idea on how to actually use assets, how to bring your data in, the use cases that you can implement within your own organization, and how to use it with Jira Service Management. I'll start jumping into questions in a moment here, so drop questions you may have down below, and then make sure to upvote the questions that you think are most relevant. So just hit the questions tab and start typing in your questions, and I'll start going over those in a moment. But that's kind of the full process that we like to demonstrate for getting started from A to Z with your assets. I definitely recommend starting with just implementing your schemas first. So create your first schema, create your first object types, start getting familiar, use some templates from Jira and Atlassian, and start to play around with it a little bit, get used to it. There's a lot of great documentation out on assets. It does get a little bit more complex with AQL and the way you filter assets. But definitely getting started with them is fairly easy, and start building schemas to get familiar with it. All right, we have some questions popping in. One question that I do get asked all the time that I wanted to cover is so as we're jumping into our questions, The one question that we get asked all the time is there going to be a more advanced version of this? So we went over all the basics and how to get started, but the most common question that we get is there going to be something more advanced on how to use automation with assets, how to dive deeper into object relationships, using advanced CSV importing, using data manager, recommended plugins and integrations. So those are questions we get asked all the time. And I wanted to let you know the answer to that is yes. So if you're interested in a more advanced course or a more advanced, essentially webinar similar to this, we're building a fully encompassed course on how to get started with assets from A to Z, just like this webinar, but we'll go a lot more in depth in this course and go over exactly how to implement your assets within your particular use case and how to go through all the automation, how to build and use Data Manager, which is an entirely separate product, which as you can imagine, it's not all going to fit into this webinar, which is why we're building this course. So if you're interested, I'll throw up a link on the screen, or feel free to scan this QR code. We are currently working on building out the course right now, so it's not officially ready yet. But if you do want early access, I'll throw up the link here. Click on the Get Early Access button or scan the QR code. When you do that, you can go ahead and jump in and fill out your info. It's a 30-second form. Shouldn't take you long at all, but we'll let you know as soon as that course is ready, and we'll email you with all the details and information. So again, we'll be going over everything from creating basic schemas, implementing data manager, implementing API integrations and plugins. We'll be going over a lot more advanced automations and bringing your data into Jira Service Management, object relationships. And as you can imagine, it's not going to fit in a webinar like this. It's not going to fit in a YouTube video. It's going to be quite a bit of hours of a course. So just click the link, sign up there, 30-second form. We'll let you know as soon as that course drops. And if you're interested in that, just go ahead and fill that out. All right, let's go ahead and start jumping into questions. So I'll start with the earliest question first. I hope this is the earliest one. Okay, there we go. This is the earliest one. So I'm using Data Center version of Jira. I get options as object schema. Is this the same as you're showing? So Data Center is a little bit different. I don't know how relevant it's going to be for me to talk about Data Center because very likely Data Center is going to be going away soon. So I don't know if you're planning any kind of migration to the cloud, but it's going to be generally the same as Data Center. The visuals might look a little bit different, but generally speaking, the demo that I showed should be fairly applicable to Data Center. Can you do an asset sync from Azure? Yes, I already mentioned this. You absolutely can. A couple ways to do this. One is with API. So you could just directly build an API integration with assets, or you could use a plugin. There's a couple of plugins that I recommend, and I could show those really quick, just so you're familiar with a couple of those plugins that I've used before. So let me pull those up. And let's see. So this is the one that I've used before that works fairly well. They have two plugins. So there's one for Azure AD, and then there's one for Intune by PIO or PIO. So I've used these before if you're interested in syncing your data, and if you're looking for a plugin, that's the one I've personally used. I have no affiliation with them, but if you're interested, check those out because they do a pretty good job of keeping a live sync between the two. So you could have your, let's say, Intune assets synced with your Jira assets and vice versa, and then you could have all that data flowing and automatically updated on a daily basis. So that's one I would definitely check out if you're interested. All right, so is there a limit to the number of custom fields you could have using Jira Service Management Premium? Not that I know of. I would say if you're hitting the limit, you're probably doing something wrong. So definitely stay away from trying to create as many custom fields and attributes as you'd like. With the hundreds of clients that I've worked with, I've never run into an attribute limit or a custom field limit. So I would definitely recommend using the least amount possible just for sanity, making sure that it's not overloaded. But yeah, you should have no problem with adding as many custom fields as you need. Have you found any good documentation on updating assets via automation? This is actually a really great question. So there's probably some good documentation on how to do this, and I would look in the Atlassian community. There's a lot of great support from the Atlassian folk all over the world. So if you Google something like how to automate some of your assets, you should be able to find some threads where similar people or similar problems have happened and how to resolve them and how to actually build those automations with some screenshots. That being said, I haven't seen any great documentation, which is partly why we're building the course. So again, check out the course if you're interested. But we'll be going over exactly how to use automation with assets, how to relate all that data the moment a ticket is created, how to relate that data on field changes, on manual triggers. So everything related to assets we'll cover there. But if you do have a very light use case or you want to look up some general information, just Google it and you should be able to find some general info. How many assets can you have in a schema? I don't know, and I've never run into a limit. That being said, I have imported assets with hundreds of thousands of different objects, so I wouldn't be too worried about hitting the limit there either. Again, I haven't run into any limits before, and I'm sure there is a limit. I believe it was in the millions at this point because they consistently update it with consistently update the amount of assets that you actually have the ability to create within your assets environment. So at Team 25 a couple weeks ago, I think they mentioned something in the millions. So again, I wouldn't worry about a limit as of right now, and they keep expanding that over time. So if your use case does grow, you're most likely going to be within the bounds of what Atlassian is going to be offering. We currently use Jamf and Workspace ONE. Is there any integration to import assets from there? I haven't seen anything native with Jamf, specifically from the assets, from the plugin library. There's probably one or two options that I could think of that might be API related that are somewhat pre-built. When it comes to Jamf and Workspace ONE, I would probably say your best bet is going to be more of a custom API solution or some kind of an API intermediary, like maybe a very light version of Zapier, Workato, something similar. You could probably automate some of your assets between the two, or you could look into some more native integrations between those. Let's take a quick peek actually and see if we can find something for Jamf in the App Store. Oh, perfect. There we go. I take that back. So PIO actually does in Jamf Importer. I wonder when this was created because I haven't seen this before. This was released last month. So there you go. With consistent updates from the Atlassian partners and the app developers, we now have a Jamf integrator. So really great to see. Happy I discovered that. So yes, you can now import from Jamf. Workspace ONE, I'm not sure. Let's see if we have one. Workspace ONE doesn't look like it, but again, I'm sure you could find some other third party or similar tool to help with that integration. So yeah, feel free to check that out. Feel free to Google some stuff. You should be able to find something. All right. Any other questions that are popping up? I am looking at the questions tab, but let me jump into the chat as well. But yeah, feel free to drop your questions in the meantime. We are wrapping up the webinar. We have a few minutes left, so I will throw up the link one more time in case you're interested in that course. So I'll throw up the link here. And again, if you're interested, 30 seconds, fill out the form. That way we know who to send it to once it's ready. So just fill out the form, fill out your information, and we'll send you an email with all the course details information as soon as it drops. We're aiming for a completion date in the next week or two, so it should be fairly soon that this is dropping. It's just taking a lot of time for us to set up and create the course since it's a lot of complex and more in-depth information than just a more surface level webinar. All right, so one more question that popped up here. What do you recommend for backing up your assets? Great question, backups. So let's take a look at a few different options. I've used Rewind and Reviz. Those are two great options. I'd maybe even just look at the ratings and see if those are something that you want to implement based on the reviews. One thing to keep in mind, a lot of times with these backup options, you actually don't have the ability to back up your assets. So let's take a look at this one and see if they have the ability to do assets. I've used a few of these before in a few different use cases, so I'm not like tied to any particular tool, but as long as there's assets, perfect. This one does have assets. So this is a great one to utilize. Looks like it's the most popular one with a lot of great reviews. So Rewind is going to be a really great option. So not only does it back up Jira, but it also backs up your assets. And the great thing about these is that they're super, super cheap. Oftentimes you're not paying more than like, $100 a month to back up all your data. And if you have a lot of sensitive and very important information that you absolutely have to back up, either for compliance or just for data loss prevention, this is going to be super affordable for you. There is one more option that I did. Oh, this one here, Insights, Assets, and Backup Migration. I think this is one that I've primarily used in the past. to sync between different sandboxes. The problem with sandboxes in Jira is that when you actually run your production data and you copy it over to your sandbox, as of today, it doesn't include any assets, which is a huge, huge problem for a lot of individuals that do use assets very heavily. So something like this will help you be able to migrate and sync all of your assets to a sandbox. That way you could actually play around with and get things implemented in your sandbox a little bit easier. Oh, my screen is not being shared. There we go. So that's the one that I was referencing. Insight Assets Backup and Migration. Great for sandbox syncing and storage, as well as general backups. But the one I was mentioning was Rewind and Reviz here. So those are the two really good options. And again, if you're looking for something more specific to your sandbox, this is a great option. Yeah, any other questions in the meantime? Restore points, save lives. Yes, they do. All right, so we're getting close to the end here. Again, if you're interested, I'll throw up that slide with the QR code. Feel free to scan that and fill out the really quick form. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions via LinkedIn or via email or our website, grid.io. Super happy to be on here today. Thank you so much for joining. Super excited to be hosting these webinars and providing a lot of value to you all who are on these webinars. So thank you for your support. Thank you for jumping on, and we'll catch you in the next one. And I'll throw up the link one more time in case someone is interested, and I'll throw up an end screen with a QR code in case you're interested in the course. But thank you all for joining.